Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Leslie presents. And now your host, Paul Leslie.
Key West is the place. We're here at the Hog's Breath with Mr. Hugo Duarte. He's taken some time to talk to us. Hello, Hugo.
How you doing, Paul?
I'm great. Thank you so much for making the time to do this.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
The first thing that steps into my mind is how interesting of a handle Hugo Duarte is. It's a cool name. Tell us a little bit about your heritage.
Well, I'm named after my father. The heritage is on my father's side Cuban and Chinese, and on my mother's side Scots-Irish. My grandmother on my dad's side was full-blooded Chinese, and my grandfather, I assume, was of Spanish descent, but Cuban, born and raised.
And speaking of Cuban, there's one of your songs called Havana Flamingo, which is a really nice song. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind that song.
Well, I didn't write that song. It was actually written by Chris Gantry and Chuck Crummell during the time of the Mariel boat lift, which I was living in Key West at the time, and it was a very interesting situation. I remember Mallory Dock being covered up with every description of boat that you could possibly imagine, where these people bailed out of Cuba and took advantage of that whole situation in order to escape from that lifestyle down in Cuba. And of course, the big stink in the press and so on and so forth was about how many criminals and so on and undesirable quote-unquote people came to the United States from that. But I really think that was a remarkable thing. First time I heard the song, I knew that I wanted to record it because there's half of my family still living in Cuba that I don't know. I have no contact or very little contact. There's one cousin that I email with on occasion, but they speak Spanish, I speak none, so our communication is difficult.
And 90 miles north of Cuba is the island of Key West, and you've made your home here. What brought you to Key West?
Originally, my dad was brought to the United States by a missionary family that lived here in Key West for a long time, and then so when I first came down to this area, it was primarily to meet some of those people that my father had lived with, and there were a number of his friends from Cuba that were living here in Key West. One of them being a guy named Gene Negreen, who was a very musically oriented person. He played in several bands, played at the Two Friends, played in the Key West Funeral Band, and so on. And he was one of my father's best friends in Cuba. So I learned a great deal about my dad by getting to be around these people and getting to talk to them. And his father was, Negreen's father was the missionary that brought my dad to this country. And he came in 1949 with the idea in mind that he wanted to be educated in the United States.
I caught your show last night at the Hog's Breath, and I was really blown away by not only your own music, but Fingers Taylor was playing with you, and he was blowing a mean harp, and it was a great show, a great time. I really liked the Allman Brothers cover. That was cool. So tell me about how you met Fingers Taylor.
Years ago, when I was living here in Key West, the bar where Margaritaville is currently, back in the day, was called Del Rio's, and we were the house band there. And I'd met Jimmy a year or two before that when we were playing down at the Pier House Hotel. That he came in and sat in with us a couple of times, and we kind of got to be friendly, and I always respected his music and his writing, and he I think that he really appreciated what we were doing, because we were different from most of the people that were playing here on the island. We were doing our own thing. We were writing our own music and that kind of thing. And he would come in and see us play. And we got a gig at Del Rio's as the house band, and Jimmy would come in, and on several occasions he brought his whole crew in with him to hear us play. And that's when we met Fingers. We also met Larry Lee, who ended up being our record producer, and Michael Utley, Sam Clayton, Ralph McDonald. A lot of those guys would come in and hear us play, and that's how we got to know them. And then we'd see Jimmy on the road in various concert locations where we'd run into each other, and he'd let us know he was going to be in town and give us passes and whatever, and we'd always go in and talk to the guys in the band, particularly Fingers and Michael. And I don't know, Greg and I just kind of had some kind of spark that was there, that we knew that we both enjoyed making music together. And last year we did a cruise down to Mexico, and we were both on the cruise, and we kind of reconnected, spent a lot of time together, played together on a number of occasions during that cruise, and we stayed in touch after that. And I had asked him if he would be interested in performing on our new album, and he said yes. And unfortunately, circumstances prevented that from actually happening, but it was quite a treat to know that Greg was willing and ready to come and do it for us. That was a real treat for me.
There's one really fun song, and it's called Cutie, and there were a lot of them last night. Tell me how you got the inspiration for Cutie.
There was a girl that I was playing at the Pier House Hotel, and they have a private area of the beach there at the Pier House where they allow the ladies to sunbathe topless, and part of the deal that they offered us to come and play at the hotel was that we had access to all areas of the hotel and the amenities that go along with that. So I met a young lady on the beach that was quite topless, and she was very attractive. And I went down and spent an afternoon trying so hard to get a date with her, and she just didn't see things my way at all. So I decided that it hurt my feelings, and I went back to the apartment and hung out for a little while, and then I thought, well, yeah, I'm a songwriter, so I can take this scenario and write it any way I want to. So I wrote it as if I'd been successful on my pitch for a date.
I wanted to ask what the significance of the piracy thing was. You got the song Modern Day Buccaneers, and I got to tell you, you look a little piratey. But yeah, go ahead.
I'll take that as a compliment. And at the time when I first arrived in Key West, there was a bit of smuggling going on. It's kind of like it was a lifestyle. I think it was an extension of the hippie lifestyle, Hunter Thompson style, if you want to look at it that way. And a lot of these guys were just opportunists that came down here, and I think back in that day, Key West was more of a renegade kind of society down here, with all the artists and writers and people that made the island famous. Jimmy was part of that. Tom McGuane, Tom Corcoran, Phil Caputo, all these great writers and interesting people. But it was more like a dare kind of thing. It was like, let's see if we can get away with it. If we do, we do. If we don't, well, we roll the dice and whatever happened. But there were a lot of guys that would go down to the Yucatan and grab a load of pot or whatever and bring it back. And I thought that was very interesting. I'd hear these stories late nights in the bars after I'd get off work, and I'd be talking to these people, and they one of the things that's most magic about Key West is that the people will tell you stories here. And they all have a million stories here. It's always been famous for that for that kind of spirit and that braggadocious kind of thing. And if you think back on songs that Jimmy wrote, for example, Pirate Looks at 40, was exactly about that kind of thing and that kind of person. So Modern Day Buccaneers for me was about some specific people that I knew, and I wrote it in the first person because that seemed to me the best way to present the idea and get it across, even though I was just relating stories that had been related to me.
There were 2 albums, and now there's 3. So tell us about the new album and anything else new in the world of Hugo Duarte.
The new album's great, and I think it's going to be a watermark for us. Content-wise, I think it's some of the best music I've ever written. We got a couple other songs that were older songs. There were a couple of songs that are brand new. I mean, even to the point where we were recording on a Monday and we wrote the song on the Thursday before we went in the studio. So it was a combination of a big span of time represented in all of this music. One of the songs on the album called Hidden River, I'd actually lost for about 27 years, and the song had came back to me in a recording that I'd made for a friend that went all the way across the country and stayed there for 20 years and then made its way all the way back to the East Coast, where it found me again. So the album is called Don't Be Fooled by the Hat, which is a great title. I like that. I think that people these days are quick to judge on their first impression, and I find through my own experience that many times our first impressions that we base on information that we see with our eyes, or an assumption that we make, or a conclusion that we jump to, many times is absolutely wrong. And I'm prone to wear a cowboy hat on occasion, and people automatically assume I'm a country singer. I don't consider myself that. I think I'm more of a southern rock kind of guy, or at least country rock. But a lot of people just see me in a cowboy hat and they'll go, "Oh, he's playing country music. Let's go somewhere else." And may make that decision before I've ever even played a note. So that was how the "Don't Be Fooled by the Hat" concept for the album and also the title song came about.
This program goes out all over the world. Not everyone in the world listens, but that's not the point. What would you, Hugo Duarte, like to say to the world?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that probably what I would most want to say is that I believe that the music that I'm doing is viable, and I believe that it has substance and depth and some meaning that is lasting. We don't really write songs to be comedy or novelty or whatever. I think most of these songs have a serious piece to them, even though they may be set in a humorous kind of context, like Cutie or Modern Day Buccaneers, or some of those that are light and popping. But I think probably what I would say is that I've got something that I believe is good that I'd like to offer, and I'd really love for people to hear it.
And how can the listeners find out more about Hugo Duarte?
Well, we have 2 websites that they can look me up on. We have www.hillbillybeach.com, and we also have www.hugoduarte.com.
Hugo, it's been real cool talking to you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. I enjoyed it.